Speaking of age limits and term limits, we've still got Mitch McConnell as I think it's like day 51 or 52 of the senator from Kentucky. We just don't even know is he alive? Why can't he just do like a 5-minute interview with CNN? They keep releasing these pictures. I mean, people are doing a lot of hilarious things with the pictures.
You would think that they would just have him like call in to a news station even. Like, can he even just like, have a simple conversation? Like, what's going on here? Mitch, come on the Independent Voter Project podcast.
Well, welcome back to the Independent Voter Podcast, everyone. Hi, I'm joined by Ethan and Shawn. Ethan in Southern California. I'm in Northern California. Shawn's out in Chicago. Let's get into it. Lots to discuss today. I think we should probably start with that. We had some elections across America last night, 5 or 6 states, but Missouri voters last night overwhelmingly rejected an attempt by the state legislature to make it more difficult to have there be citizens' initiatives in Missouri. What do you think about that, Shawn?
Well, I think, the Missouri legislature has tried multiple times to do this. This has been something that we've covered on IVN, how they've tried to raise the threshold to 60%. They've tried to raise the petition requirements to get initiatives on the ballot and restrict and place limitations on how you can collect and where you can collect and the time frame that you can collect. And this is just one of those things. And the voters saw through it overwhelmingly. Even, the majority party obviously is doing this to try to limit direct democracy and attempt to allow the legislature to have full control over exactly what policies passed in the state. But even, Republicans in Missouri said, no, you're not going to take away our ability to dictate policy whenever we think the legislature either is doing something that we don't want it to do or is not doing something that we want it to do. So,
and that's the thing, right? That's the thing with citizens initiatives and like the tension between the state legislatures and the citizens using their citizen democracy given to them in 25 different constitutions, right? There's always going to be this power struggle between the legislature saying, no, we've got this citizenry, and the citizenry saying, no, you haven't got this. And that's sort of like why it's designed this way in all these constitutions. And it's sort of brilliant. And here is the legislature trying to take back some of their power in Missouri, and the citizens saying, no, we'd like to keep it the way that it is and have us be empowered to act against you when we band together. I think it's pretty cool. And our friend Katie Fahey, I'm pretty sure she was working on it out there. Ethan, What do you think about all this? Do you understand how that all works?
It sounds like the classic tale of the type of race where it's more of an information battle than anything, right? Because the citizens, if you asked, most citizens, should we be able to place, initiatives on the ballot and have that be a possibility as opposed to just the legislature being able to pass bills, I think, 90% of Americans will say, well, of course we should be able to, put our own bills on there without going through the bureaucracy of the government and such. But what happens is the legislature have these connections and have the ability to kind of spread this disinformation out there that, sometimes they end up prevailing in these type of situations because they're able to control the narrative. And here we saw a great example of, that did not happen. The citizens understood what was going on and they made the right choice here. So I think that's great.
And we've seen a number of initiatives, actually an increase in citizen initiatives in Missouri, which is probably why they're trying to push this so heavily,
totally.
Including an anti-gerrymandering effort a few years ago, which then the legislature decided to do a little trickery, put another initiative on the next year to essentially just repeal the anti-gerrymandering effort, the independent redistricting effort that the citizens approved the previous election cycle. And this time around, after the Missouri legislature had passed a mid-cycle gerrymander, Missouri was the third state in 2025, the legislature to redraw its congressional map in order to give the party in power an advantage, following Texas and then California. And then it was Missouri after that with HB1. And then people, not politicians there, had immediately launched a referendum veto campaign, which, you're very familiar with those type of campaigns, Cara. And
Well,
then,
that's the cool thing, right? The people's veto. So
yeah,
most of these constitutions not only give the people the power to put an initiative on the ballot if they gather enough signatures and go through all the processes to do so that the people can vote on something, but
mhm.
they also have this thing called people's veto, where that if the legislature does something that the people don't like, you can gather signatures to veto what the legislature did. So, it's a real check on the legislative power, which is why they hate it so much, which is why in Missouri they're trying to limit it.
Yeah,
But I guess
and
that Hoskins, there's something going on with Hoskins in Missouri too, right?
yeah, so on the same day as we had these primaries, a few hours before polls closed, Denny Hoskins, Secretary of State, held a news conference and he declared that the people's veto, the veto referendum against the gerrymander there, was unconstitutional. And this is after several months of litigation, several months of controversy of the GOP leadership in that state having a big problem with this group trying to say, no, we don't want you to gerrymander these maps. And People Not Politicians collected over 300,000 signatures.
That's a lot.
That's a lot
That's
of
a lot.
signatures.
Yeah.
And in a state that also, again, this includes Republicans, this includes independents, this includes Democrats, and it all started, the issues with it started when Hoskins said, I'm not going to count a third of these signatures because they happened to be collected before I approved the referendum for petition circulation. And so citing a law that was previously ruled unconstitutional was no longer a law in Missouri. And so you've had all these little, so all these things like the attorney general reported People Not Politicians to ICE, saying that they were using illegal immigrants to collect signatures.
Oh my God.
They sent out, and this story, they sent out that mass text message on Black Friday, trying to get people, dissuade people from signing the petitions when petitioners were out at, the stores and whatnot, what people were shopping. And then after they submit the signatures, what is usually supposed to happen when this occurs, when people submit signatures for a veto referendum, is that the bill being challenged is supposed to be suspended. It's supposed to be frozen. They didn't do that.
Yeah, totally. They didn't?
Yeah, they didn't do that.
That's against the law.
Yeah. So there's been multiple litigations on this. The courts have, for the most part, just let this play out. Like when People Not Politicians challenged the Hoskins refusal to count a third of its signatures, the judge said, well, let's wait until the verification process is finished and then I'll rule on it. Right.
Oh my God, because it wasn't ripe yet for him or something.
Well,
or
right.
for the
But
judge.
here's the thing. In Missouri, they had until late July to finish the verification process and this past Tuesday to officially certify. So they had several months to delay. And by March, People Not Politicians reported that the data from the Secretary of State's office said that they had enough signatures. But still, Hoskins didn't certify it. And then in the very last minute, he decided that he was to declare it unconstitutional. And now it's going to go before the state courts. So
The state Supreme Court. And so this is it's kind of par for the course. I love actually that all of this is happening, because when there's this tension, then the people just get sort of more and more aware of the power that they do have or don't have.
Yeah.
And it's all good for the democracy. And we always talk on the show about Ethan, right? They always take all the power that they have on the table. And in this case, it looks like the voters of Missouri, organized under this People Not Politicians group, is also taking the power that they have on the table.
That's right.
And so that's
how it should be.
That's how it should be. It's healthy. It's good. It's sort of alarming for some of us to watch, right? But speaking of power grabs by the party, the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, wow.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Shawn wrote a whole story about it on Independent Voter News last week. So
I did.
And then there was another guest column as well. Let's get into that.
Yeah, so the DNC is considering the Bylaws and Rules Committee for the DNC has already approved of this rule, and it's going to go before the full Democratic National Committee body on August 15th, and that is a amendment to their delegation or their delegate allocation process where they prohibit the use of ranked choice voting. And since 2020, there have been six state parties that have used it for their nomination process, whether it's a primary or a caucus. Two jurisdictions now have it in law that they need to use it, Maine being one of them, but also Washington, D.C. recently passed as well, overwhelmingly. Ranked choice voting has been shown to be very popular with Democrats. And so now the DNC, the Rules Committee of Rob Ritchie on IVN had shared that this was an effort started by Frank Leone, who is, or Leone, I think it's Leone, not sure, whichever.
One
guy
with some outsized power who's going to try to tell 90% of Democrats who like ranked choice voting that they cannot have it. And especially like he's going to try, this one guy is going to try to say to the state of Maine, who passed the law, the Senate president is the one who authored the law, the guy who's currently the candidate for the Democratic Party candidate for United States Senate running against Susan Collins is the author of the ranked choice voting for president law in Maine. And this guy, Frank, is going to try to say, no, you guys can't do that.
Well, so it's worth noting that he's the one who launched this effort. He's the one who organized it, but he's certainly not the only party insider who has a problem with ranked choice voting. And we've seen this in places like Maine and places like Washington, D.C., where party leaders actively tried to keep it from being implemented. And so Frank Leone had organized this effort with the Bylaws Committee, suggesting that ranked choice voting isn't compatible with how they allocate and select delegates, which is interesting, again, because for two presidential cycles, 6 states have within those 2 cycles, 6 states total have used, 6 parties have used it. And there wasn't an issue then because the Bylaws Committee had to approve of those states using ranked choice voting and their plan then. So then it wasn't a problem. I think this is an important reminder for people that the presidential nomination process has never really been about democracy. And this is not to say, so Maine and Washington, D.C. have both passed laws allowing ranked choice voting. The DNC rule, if the DNC body approves it on August 15th, it will not eliminate those laws. It will not, but...
That's good.
Because the party does not have the authority to strip away law, but it can get around it in a sense. So instead, in what the DNC will do in Maine and Washington, D.C., is that they will not count votes past the first count of tabulation within ranked choice voting. So the voters in Maine, the voters in D.C., they could still use ranked ballots, but only their first choice elections will count. So it'll be like it wouldn't matter why use ranked choice voting at that point. And the confusing thing for voters is going to be, well, the state's going to continue to tally the ranked choice voting results. And so the results from the state could look very different from the results that the DNC reports. So it's
pretty slimy.
Same old.
Yeah.
Got to say, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Well, and you have to understand that there's going to be a lot of, again, party insiders, party leaders who are going to look at this as an opportunity to get rid of ranked choice voting because they may see that it would advantage the candidate they want if ranked choice voting is not in place. If all we're talking about is a mere plurality of the electorate deciding what happens. And we've seen this in recent cycles where the parties, they want these nomination contests over quickly.
It's true. They really don't love the competition for real.
They don't like the competition. In the last 2 cycles, the party nominations have been pretty much locked up by Super Tuesday. And what you've seen in the past is that, and we've been picking on the Democratic Party, the Republican Party does this as well.
Totally.
They'll change the rules to benefit a party or a candidate or, benefit a desired outcome. And we saw this with the DNC last cycle when, they didn't hold debates. They didn't hold primaries. They intentionally kept certain candidates off the ballot. They reorganized the schedule for the primaries in a way that they thought would advantage Joe Biden the most, which is why you had which is why you had the situation in New Hampshire where they had the primaries there, but because by law they had to hold the primaries before the DNC would allow, DNC stripped New Hampshire of their delegate selection process, or their delegates, right? Their ability to select their delegates, and which is, again, something that they legally can do. They've defended this in court. That's how the system works, is that the parties have full control within these nomination processes. Like the state will still hold a legal primary. They'll still count the ballots, but that may not necessarily go towards the delegate allocation and selection process that ultimately chooses the nominee. And then in the very end last cycle, we found out, well, the primary election didn't really matter anyways, because after that disastrous debate for Biden, they decided to, they get rid of him and put in place Harris. So
and think about how much, in that situation, so much taxpayer funding, taxpayer money is being wasted funding an election that literally will count for nothing at the end of the day. It's like, this is why, the Independent Voter Project is, not necessarily anti-party, but pro-voter, because we need to either make these publicly funded elections, put them back under the control of the people, or take away some of that control and make the parties fund it themselves, right? That's the whole point of it. So I think that's if anyone heard about, you tell your average person, look, we just held an entire election in this state and it's literally going to count for nothing just because the DNC decided, I think they would be pretty upset.
Kind of sounds like Maine a little bit, right? They had a whole primary election on June 9th, 2026, and 72% of the people voted for Graham Plattner to be the Senate nominee in the Democratic primary, which was a record turnout. And then lo and behold, there's a statute in Maine law that allowed for the Democratic Party of Maine to replace that candidate with Troy Jackson. So, we still live in a free country. So, I just feel like this is all freedom, really. Like, even if we don't love what the parties are doing or agree with it, it's still, it is, let freedom ring, let 1,000 flowers bloom. And if the people, hopefully we just illuminate it, right? We just show people what's going on. We talk about it. We write about it and the people at least know. Speaking of age limits and term limits, we've still got Mitch McConnell, you guys. I think it's like day 51 or 52 of the senator from Kentucky. We just don't even know is he alive? Why can't he just do like a 5-minute interview with CNN? They keep releasing these pictures. I mean, people are doing a lot of hilarious things with the pictures.
You would think that they would just have him like call into a news station, even like, can he even just like, have a simple conversation? Like, what's going on here?
Well,
so come on the Independent Voter Project podcast.
Yeah, the big conspiracy was that they were going to wait to announce that he died after the deadline that Andy Bashir could have selected his at least temporary replacement until the election, which didn't happen. No. So
yesterday.
Yeah, that was earlier this week. That didn't happen, but I do think it is just fueling these conspiracies. The fact that we have no answers, no anything about what's happening with Mitch McConnell, and obviously the whole thing about this is bringing up things like age limits and term limits and the importance of these. We have people who have been in Congress for half a century at this point, and it's interesting to think about, and it's crazy to think about. And a lot of it just has to do with the fact that we have no competition. And so in this country, and so a candidate can be in office for pretty much as long as they want, as long as they're in a safe district, as long as they're in the majority party within that district. As long as they want to be in office, they can be in office. That's
exactly.
I think that there should be, I've never really loved the idea of term limits so much, but I'm really onto this thing about age limits. I think like 75, and don't just make it for the politicians, make it for everybody, make it for the judges, make it for the people who are working for agencies. just have there be like, if the taxpayers are paying you, if your job is a government job and the taxpayers are paying you, you should retire
It's just
at
right,
75.
It's mandatory retirement age. We don't even need to call it age limits. It's like, hey, go live your life. Go to Croatia for a bit.
It's like
go chill, man.
It's the one thing I like about Dan Osborne out of Nebraska, an independent candidate. People are like, "Are you gonna do you support term limits? Do you like?" And I don't. I think Osborne's answer was not necessarily that he supports term limits, but he's gonna keep to like 2 terms because he's like, "I want to retire, man."
Yeah, let's elect people with normal.
That's the same thing that Susan Collins said, right? She said she was going to do 2 terms. That's it, 12 years.
Really?
Meanwhile, it's double now.
Well,
Come on.
and not this isn't an endorsement of Osborne or anything, but I have a feeling that a working class guy like him, when he says, "Dude, one day I just want to retire," like he means it. Like someone who's been in that kind of life his entire life. He wants that retirement, but he also wants to be able to serve for a couple terms, and it's an admirable thing. But yeah, definitely, like if you're saying that, then it's definitely good if you keep to your word, and if you say you're only going to be in here for 2 terms, you're only I'm going to get in 2 terms, get out, because for senators that's 12 years, right?
It's a wonderful amount of time, or maybe I don't know. I just feel like after a certain age, you're not as unfortunately, your brain just doesn't work as well as it used to. Like literally, they can look and see that your brain shrinks, right? As you get older. Speaking of brain shrinkage, Trump's poll numbers have hit a new low, but I was just reading, he declared that all of that's not true. Quote, all caps, "My real poll numbers are the highest they have ever been." Capital letters. Like, if he uses capital letters, does that mean that it's more true? Like, what the heck?
Exactly. He can do it in capital letters. He can capitalize just the first word of the letter. He's kind of got his own vernacular going there, like his own grammar that just, it declares the importance of things. And when I read that, I thought, oh my God, all the pollsters in America, they must be wrong. They must be wrong now that it's been true.
They literally have polls going back to the 1940s, Ethan, and the polls say that he is the most unpopular second-term president at this stage of tenure ever, ever, ever in the history of 100 years of polling.
Well, right. And a lot of this is, people feeding him the information that he wants to hear. And most likely what it is that people are feeding him polls about his approval among Republicans, because among Republicans, he's still very popular, right? He's still like the MAGA influence is still very much there within the party. And so, he'll say that applies to everybody. He's still very popular. And so, yeah, a lot of it is, you have a president who is just fed information. He takes that information and he goes with it. If it favors him, right, he wins every golf game, right, and his club course, right, he's everything favors him. So it's
well, the good thing is the great, banks and other financial institutions of America, they may have seen that tweet before us because they're signed up for the True Social exclusive API to get his tweets earlier than everyone else. So, at least they got to know early.
$100,000 a pop, right? So they're on offer from our wonderful president is a deal that he's made with people where if they pay $100,000 to, I guess it's to Truth Social, that they can get his tweets earlier than everybody else. Like, what the heck is that? Isn't that like insider trading? I mean, I don't understand. I don't understand.
I'm no lawyer, but I'm going to say there's a pretty significant case that it is there. I mean, maybe, maybe there's a case to be made that it's not, but I really don't see it.
I mean, he probably has some legal loophole that he can work in there, which is why, when you had this congressional stock trading ban that was kind of attached to everything under the sun to try to get the other thing passed as opposed to actually getting a legitimate congressional stock trading ban passed. It conveniently leaves out the executive branch, the president and the vice president and all that. And so it's funny to think about, but I will say on the issue of age limits and with regards to all this stuff with Trump, it does also apply to the other side. That's why a lot of people thought Biden needed to drop out of the race in 2024 is because of the decline that people saw in that debate. And when you're pushing 80 into 81, 82, and you're in the presidency, that's a stressful, taxing job on one's mind and on one's body. And so, yeah, it is worth noting that, again, to speak to how taxing the presidency is, how stressful that job is, how weary a person becomes in that job. Remember, Obama came into office looking young, looking like charismatic, fit, everything. He left office all gray hair. He still looks good, but it ages, that office ages you by 20 years. Right. And you're talking about someone
it's classic. Like they always have the before and after pictures, but 80 years old, the president of the United States right now, 80 years old, thinks his poll numbers are the highest they've ever been when actually they're the lowest on record. And, there's another poll that just came out that I wanted to talk to you guys about. It's a Gallup poll talking about election concerns that 2 out of 3 Americans are concerned that their political leaders are pressuring or are going to pressure election officials to change election outcomes. So 67% are concerned a great deal or a fair amount that that ballots will not be properly handled, counted, secured, and worse still, the top concern is that politicians will pressure election officials to change the outcomes of elections. That's crazy, guys. That's 2 in 3 Americans.
We've certainly fallen a long way from the idealistic ideas of American democracy. But I'll tell you what, I'm not even surprised, because just the other day I was scrolling and you can hear audio of Trump trying to find 11,000 more votes in Georgia back in 2020. So, of course this is spreading through because we got one party who is blatantly doing it, and then that same party is saying that the other party is trying to get illegal immigrants to vote. So it's like across the spectrum, we're undermining elections, we're undermining the validity of the system that underpins the elections, and then also just generally degrading trust in our institutions. So it's
right. When both sides are pointing the finger at the other and saying they're cheating, they're going to cheat, they're going to rig the results.
Yeah, what do you think's going to happen? You're right, Shawn.
When both sides do that, what do you expect other than that? Again, I guess when both parties are doing that, a broad majority of Americans are going to be like, I don't know if I actually trust the system anymore, and I'm a little concerned that people are going to try to manipulate the results, and part of that has to do with the fact that the people who administer the elections, control the elections process, are the party members themselves, which kind of fuels that, right? Whether it's gerrymandering that's happening in Texas or California or Missouri or Virginia or Maryland, right? Maryland is now putting a gerrymander on the ballot, right?
Oh, no.
All these efforts, and Americans are seeing this, and that just fuels this distrust they have. The parties are doing this to the process. They are fueling this mistrust intentionally, for their own benefit.
And speaking of mistrust, like some of it probably has to do with money in politics too. And we have this week learned that Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, who's worth $781 billion the last time I checked. I think Ethan, you were saying he's the only person who went from trillionaire to billionaire. Wasn't that you who was talking about that?
That's true. I may have brought that up before, but yeah.
So he has a super PAC. It's called America PAC. As everybody knows, he put in $300 million to help the president in 2024 into that super PAC, and now he's going to do it again. They say that he's going to spend, the New York Times reports he's going to spend about $120 million in these midterm elections. Going to basically try to boost the conservative voter turnout. They're going to do door-to-door canvassing. They're going to do digital ads. They're going to do direct mail. They'll probably do television. And, meanwhile...
I mean, when you have money at that scale, why not throw some money at it? I
Yeah.
mean, it's
I mean,
just like, why
whether
would he not?
whether he's a trillionaire on paper or billionaire, right? He has the money to do it. He's going to do it. The current system allows him to exert his influence financially a bit, which of course is why we've seen increasing focus on the issue of money in politics in this country. This is a 90-10 issue that people think that there's too much money. It doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you are on. You think there's too much money in politics, and we can get into debate about at what point does it really, like, at what point would more money matter, because there's only so many ads you can run, there's only so many mailers you can send out, there's only so much resources that you can actually spend this money on. But at the end of the day, this is something that people are concerned about. They do think it needs to be reined in. And that's why we have organizations that are trying to do something about it, right? American Promise, right?
Well, and I'm pretty sure, like, right now in Maine, they're trying to get rid of super PACs. The people are. I mean, that sounds like something that could potentially stop the influence or mitigate the influence of I guess, trillionaire, now billionaire, like Elon Musk.
Yeah, I mean, we have this effort going that started about 3 summers ago. 2 nonprofits, one called Equal Citizens and one that I led called the Citizens to End Super PACs. We gathered signatures for a ballot initiative that would cap contributions to super PACs at $5,000 a pop. It was question 1 on the ballot in November of 2024. It passed with 74.9% of the vote. The AP called it an emphatic vote. Just also to let everybody know, it was a record turnout election on that November 4th, 2024. And there were 600,191 votes that got cast in favor of question 1, which was the most votes than any initiative or any politician has ever gotten in the state of Maine. So, of course, what happened? 2 super PACs sued us and sued the people of Maine and said, no, you can't do that. So we've been in a court battle ever since. On July 29th, just last week, our attorney, who's called Neil Katyal, he argued our case before the First Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston. And, I'm not a lawyer, but I listened to the oral arguments and he was really persuasive, you guys. And the questions that the 3 judges asked him as he was making his presentation just really seemed like those judges had done their homework. They had read all the briefs. They seemed to really understand the argument that Katyal was making. And, everybody thinks that Citizens United already banned super PACs, but that is just not true. Like, the Supreme Court has never ruled on super PACs, which is why we brought this, why this is all going on. And, maybe we've got a story up on IVN that I wrote yesterday about Larry Lessig, who's my counterpart at Equal Citizens, helping to get this done. But experts like Larry, they think that it's very possible that the Supreme Court will seize the chance to finally rule on the issue of individual contributions to super PACs. And he thinks that we could get 7 out of 9 of the votes. So we'll see.
That would be impressive. It has, of course, been very difficult for anyone who's challenging the increasingly unmitigated flow of cash into our politics to challenge it in courts, because ultimately, going back even 50 years in court precedent, that money somehow equals speech, right? Which is kind of been used to, in multiple cases at this point, to kind of just chip away at the regulations that have existed, to kind of keep a check on the amount of money that does flow in and type of organizations that are allowed to influence elections through money, like super PACs now. And obviously, Citizens United didn't create super PACs. It did have a role in increasing their activity, though, because it had to do with independent expenditures. But hopefully, the Supreme Court finally rules in a way that is favorable to campaign finance reformers.
Yeah, I mean, if we get past this Court of Appeals, so this is like a 3-judge panel that is reviewing a lower U.S. District Court decision out of Maine. The judge in Maine ruled against us. And so then we have now taken this to the Court of Appeals. And like I said, the questions that the judges were asking Katyal, they like interrupt. So he gets up to make his statement, and they interrupt him midway. And the questions that they asked him really made it seem like they understood that there is a distinction between making a contribution and then the super PAC exercising its right to speak freely and to spend what they want, so that a super PAC can still spend whatever it wants to spend and say whatever it wants to say. What we're trying to limit is the amount that goes into the super PAC, the contribution that goes in, because in that case, if the super PAC is spending to benefit a candidate, right? This is not for issues. This is just when it has to do with a candidate who's running for office, that the public has basically the right under the law to expect that there's not a conflict of interest there, right? That contribution being made to that super PAC for that politician, that there hasn't been some deal struck ahead of time where it's like, hey, Ethan, I'm going to give 10 million to your super PAC. So then when I want you to rule
Right.
for me later as a senator, wink, wink, nod,
Mhm.
nod,
Mhm.
you know who got you elected. Like a lot of people could argue that Elon Musk in 2024, by putting the money that he did, hundreds of millions of dollars into those swing states like Pennsylvania, for example, he put tons of money into Pennsylvania. And Trump won Pennsylvania, and that was one of the states that he needed to win to put him over the edge. These states, these battleground states, you could say that Elon Musk, that there's a bit of a conflict, right?
Yeah.
Now that after the fact, you can look and see all the things that the president and the administration have done to benefit Elon Musk and his companies, and
No question.
kind of no
There's
question.
a
And so
conflict. Yeah.
there's no question. So when we're looking at that, just as the American people, our Constitution does say, and our laws do say, that we are entitled not only to a system that doesn't have conflicts of interest, but where there's also no appearance
Mm-hmm.
of corruption, right? It's not only that we deserve a system where there is no corruption, we also deserve a system where there's no appearance of corruption, so that we can keep the faith in our own democracy. And so that when we look at it, we don't think that it's all rigged for the rich and the famous and the people who have that kind of money to put in, that we're entitled to a system that's free of that. So, before it gets to the Supreme Court, we'd have to win at this Court of Appeals, at which point a decision by the First Circuit would be, I guess, in conflict with decisions from other Court of Appeals and other circuits, at which point the Supreme Court would have to say, okay, we'll take this case and we'll decide once and for all if super PACs are okay, or if they're not okay, and you can put limits on them. Like, again, they're not going to say all super PACs are bad. They're just going to say limit to $5,000. You can $5,000 is the amount. And just like when you say, I can only give, whatever it is, $6,000, $7,000 to a candidate directly who's running, same kind of thing. I can only give this amount to a super PAC, which is operating.
Well, sounds like that's what we need. That's what needs to change. I mean, I think what you're bringing up about the Constitution is something that I certainly wasn't taught about in school, and that's, I mean, I find it hard to believe that anyone would say there isn't at least the appearance of corruption, right? What's going on right now? So that's
right,
that's
and
really
we're all
interesting.
sort of like, it is kind of interesting, right? It's not only that we're entitled to a system that is free of the corruption itself, but we're supposed to have faith and be able to have faith in the system, that we're not like thinking like what's really going on there.
Yeah.
Right. And if Elon Musk could only give 5,000 to a super PAC, or 5,000 to, hell, do 20 super PACs, Elon, but just, this thing where you do hundreds of millions of dollars, it's kind of
It's too
sad.
much. That's why we gotta
too much.
Exactly. We gotta keep fighting back, and that's exactly why you should keep listening to the Independent Voter podcast, because we will keep you aware of all the issues like that. You can read more of our content on IVN, and definitely make sure to hit subscribe on YouTube, follow on Instagram, follow us on Facebook. and also follow us on X. Thank you, Elon.
Thank you, Elon. And also come to Independent Voter News, ivn.us, to see all of our recent stories. We've got lots of interesting stuff up on the website this week. Got a guest column from Jay Field out of Maine about the Maine Senate race, which is really good. Happy to have Jay, who's a former reporter and an NPR reporter and a radio reporter, contributing to us. We've got some stuff from Mike Madrid and generally some articles from Shawn and me and Matt. Shinners wrote a great article about Dan Osborne, so come check out Independent Voter News, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
This is the Independent Voter Podcast, sponsored by the Independent Voter Project and produced by OLAS Media. Remember, you can always find the Independent Voter Podcast or the How It Really Works series at ivn.us. Follow and subscribe at olasmedia.com.
OLAS Media.